Yo, welcome back everybody to a brand new video here on the second channel, and today I thought I would do a top 5 best decks video for EUIC. Haven't done a top 5 best decks video before, but I did get a lot of comments on my tier list video of people asking if they could maybe see the list that I kind of was talking about for placements on the tier list, and I was like, well, I mean, tier list videos, I feel are a bit more, like, laid back, but I was like, well, what if I did a tier list, or what if I did a top 5 video based on what I think are the best decks for UIC. This is my opinion. These are what I believe to be the top 5 best decks for UIC. I will be providing some lists in this video and all of that good stuff. So if you want to actually see the list of the decks I was talking about this time, and it will be provided here in this video. Now, leave a like on the video if you enjoyed. Let me know what you thought of the top 5. What do you think are the top 5 best decks in the format in the comments below? And if you haven't subbed to the second channel yet, click that subscribe button down below. Without further ado, let's get into the top 5. Coming to the number 5 spot, I've actually gone with Mew. Now, I think Mew is actually in a pretty good spot right now as one of the top decks. I think it does have a few things that hold it back. One, it still has a bit of an awkward matchup against Lost Zone decks, and every deck really should just be playing Drapion right now, and I think Drapion is going to be a very big factor as to why Mew may or may not, do as well going into EUIC. I think the deck is still insane. Mew does get to play Judge and Path, which is a very good combo right now. Again, I think the big issue with Mew overall is that it does have a bit of a sketchier time into Lost Box, and with every deck playing a Drapion, I mean, this is always going to cause Mew issues, whether or not, you're playing the Path and the Judge and the Roxanne. Drapion is still very popular. It's really one of the things holding it back now. I did include Double Turbo Mew because Double Turbo Mew is the best performing Mew deck on Limitless right now over the Fusion Mew. I know there's a lot of people on the Fusion Mew hype train, though. Fusion Mew is also pretty solid right now. I think both builds of Mew, both are good, and they both kind of have their different ways you can go about it. I do think DT Mew is a little better because it does get to be a little bit more tech-heavy. The Fusion Mew doesn't get to play as much Disruption, where the Double Turbo Mew can really get to kind of abuse cards like Judge and Path of Peak a little bit better, and it allows you to be a little bit more aggressive with your plays and just kind of win more games that way. I mean, Meloetta is still good, don't get me wrong, but I do think that Fusion Mew is a little bit worse going into Lost Box than Double Turbo Mew, which I think Double Turbo Mew has a better matchup against Lost Box. This is kind of the way I take it anyways. But yeah, I think that Fusion Mew is not as good as Double Turbo Mew, and Double Turbo Mew is pretty solid in my opinion. I mean, both builds of Mew are perfectly fine in my opinion overall, but I do think Double Turbo Mew is the better build. Look, if I was going to play Mew to EUIC, I would have probably played Double Turbo Mew. But yeah, Double Turbo Mew I think is the 5th bet deck right now. It does have decent matchups, but again, with cards like Drapion and Skyseal Stone being very prevalent right now, and we'll get into what the rest of the top 5 is to kind of break down why Mew is at the bottom. I still think Mew is just really good though nonetheless, and it still wins games because it is Mew at the end of the day, but I think that it is at number 5. So let's move on to what I got at number 4. All right, coming to number 4, I've actually gone with Giratina. Now, I actually think Giratina is actually pretty solid right now in the meta. I was kind of iffy on the deck at first, but honestly, with its performances on Limitless and the hype that it's getting, a lot of people are really backing Giratina up. So people still are drinking that Giratina Kool-Aid. Giratina does still seem good. Again, the ability to have a Giratina, being able to use an insta-KO is really good right now. Being able to use, one-shots with Lost Impact, having Sableye and Cram and Greninja, you still have a pretty good base work for a Lost Zone deck. Again, the only issue I have with Giratina is it does take a weirder, mirror match, or a weirder matchup, sorry, into Lost Box decks, because you're going to struggle against the mirror because you're playing 6 cards in your deck that aren't going to be very helpful in a Lost Box mirror match because you're not going to be putting Giratina into play in the Lost Box mirror. So you're basically just playing Sableye, Cramorant, Comfey. So you're basically just playing like a very vanilla Lost Zone deck. That's kind of the issue, is it's awkward Lost Box matchup, but honestly, Giratina is still pretty good. Not saying that its Lost Box matchup is like terrible, it's just a little bit more awkward. You are at a disadvantage in that matchup, but I do think that you can still beat the matchup. It's not unwinnable by any means. But yeah, Giratina is really good right now. I think it has a great matchup spread across the board, and in my opinion, is the number 4 spot on this list. I think Giratina is just really strong right now, and it's pretty scary. Again, being able to one-hit KO stuff with your V-Star power and your main attack does offer for some pretty crazy plays. Giratina does have stuff like Roxanne still, so it's definitely still got the disruption elements that Giratina's had before. I could see Giratina playing, more Temple of Sinnoh or Path of the Peak in their deck to try to combat the mirror match or the Lost Zone matches in general. But Giratina's just really solid right now. I think that it's a pretty strong deck in the format. and I think that it's the number 4 spot here going into EUIC. Again, I think Giratina is a really strong pick. I think a lot of people are really drinking that Giratina Kool-Aid right now, and I think there's going to be some people that are really going to try to bring Giratina up to another level after EUIC, and I definitely think there's going to be some big players on Giratina in EUIC. We'll get into that in my meta predictions video, but for now, I got Giratina here at the number 4 spot heading into EUIC. At number 3, I have Gardevoir. Now, these 3 spots on this list are now basically what I consider to be S-tier decks heading in to EUIC. These are the 3 best decks, in my opinion, for EUIC. And at number 3, I've gone with Gardevoir. Gardevoir, I think, is in a really strong spot right now. I think Gardevoir is still a really good deck. A lot of people are really hating on it, saying that it's got a bad Lost Box matchup or it's not as good against this or that. I still think Gardevoir is insane. The ability to abuse cards like Zacian V, having access to Skyseal Stone, which I know this list doesn't play any. This is just the highest placing Gardevoir list that I found on Limitless, but I do think that you still have to play Skyseal Stone in Gardevoir nonetheless. But yeah, Gardevoir is just a very good deck right now, in my opinion. And if it sets up, it's almost unbeatable. Again, being able to abuse cards like Zacian are really good. The Shining Arcana Gardevoir is also a really good attacker. And some lists will play Klefki, some lists will play this Ralt, some lists play Cresselia. I think the big one is going to be the other list that Gardevoir has, and that is Gardevoir Mewtwo. Gardevoir Mewtwo is genuinely popping off right now. It's actually doing better in bigger tournaments than actual regular Gardevoir is right now on Limitless. So for whatever reason, Mewtwo seems to be the best deck for Gardevoir, and honestly, I kind of see the potential of the deck. Mewtwo does make your Lost Box matchup a little bit easier. Basically, you Lost Box will go down to 3 prize cards remaining, and then before you play Mewtwo, you go Rock Sand. You Rock Sand your opponent, then you put the Mewtwo into play, and then you start doing Psysplosion. You're basically going to pray that Lost Box doesn't have the Drapion Mirage Gate combo to KO your Mewtwo after you hit them with the Rock Sand. That's basically the purpose behind the Mewtwo build here of Gardevoir, and I think Mewtwo Gardevoir is honestly still a pretty good deck nonetheless. Mewtwo does provide a lot of power in that matchup, and Mewtwo's just good in general. There's so many times you can just put Mewtwo into play and you just win the game because the opponent has no way to deal with it. It is still sketchy though, because it does get caught in the crossfire of Drapion already being played in Lost Box, and even having Tyranitar V in the format is a pretty big scary factor for the Mewtwo. But overall, I think Mewtwo Gardevoir is really good. Again, it is the highest performing Gardevoir deck on Limitless. Like, if you look at normal Gardevoir on Played Out Limitless, you're going to see that it's doing good, but not doing as good in bigger tournaments than Mewtwo. Mewtwo is doing better in larger scale tournaments, which is, I think, a bigger deal and makes Mewtwo maybe the better way to play it right now. The deck, the deck has some, believers, but there are people that say that Mewtwo Gardevoir is not that good because you are playing 4 dead cards in your deck. If you prize a Mewtwo piece, it gets a little awkward. The deck still kind of functions like a normal Gardevoir deck. You still have the Gardevoirs to attack with. You still have Zacian Skyseal Stone, which is just ridiculous. So, like, a lot of the time you can not even use Mewtwo and still win the game. It's just that good of an archetype, but when the Mewtwo is useful, it is really, really useful. I think Mewtwo Guardi is legit a decent deck. And one of the best decks in the format, and I think that both builds of Gardevoir are both kind of valid right now. Again, the list I got here, size placing build, I'm not a fan of this build. Again, it doesn't have Skyseal Stone or anything. But I do think that Mewtwo Gardevoir is also really good, and also regular Guardi is good. I don't think Guardi is good right now. Again, that shakier Lost Box matchup may be the only thing that holds it back from being number 2. Because I think that the top 2 decks in the format that I have above Gardevoir, I think, have a better matchup into Gardevoir, but Gardevoir still beats a lot of other things in the format. And the nice thing about Gardevoir, too, I think that it kind of beats most of, like, the fringe decks in the format. It's another thing. If a deck can beat all, like, the fringe, less popular decks, and I think a deck is really good, and I think Gardevoir has the ability to do that because of cards like Zacian, Skyseal Stone. The Mewtwo V Union can be really good, and of course, Shine Arcana Gardevoir can also help quite a bit, too. And let's move on to what I think are the top 2 best decks in the format right now. And at the number 2 spot is going to be Lugia. Now, Lugia is still as good as, well, it's always been. It's still a very strong deck. I don't think it's number 1. A lot of people kind of go back and forth between the number 1 spot and Lugia being number 1, not number 2. But I still think Lugia deserves to be number 2 over number 1. I think the deck is still strong. It's very, very strong. I think its main issue is that it's going to have consistency issues overall. Lugia can lose games because of Path to Peak, or just because you're not able to draw well enough to set up your Archeops. Again, Lugia is not as consistent as it used to be, but Lugia is still just an insanely powerful deck and has a really good matchup against most decks in the format. I mean, it beats everything. I mean, you got the Tyranitar, which has really good typing right now, obviously into Gardevoir and into Mew. You have the Stone Journer, which is really good against Arceus and Miraidon. The Radiant Serena, I think, is really good in Mew, or Lugia, sorry, because you get to heal, which helps against Lost Box, especially if the opponent's trying to knock out your Archeops with Greninja plus Sableye. The Serena's really good in that matchup. And again, Lugia is just still a very powerful deck. Being able to put 2 Archeops into play is still really good. If you're able to do this on your second turn and take a big knockout right away with Lugia or Tyranitar, you're sitting pretty. Lugia is more of a casino. Nowadays, a lot of people will play the Capturing Aroma and the Mesagoza Stadium, which are both, like, really good. But they're very coin flip reliant, right? And that's the downside. There's a lot of people playing just straight Great Ball in the deck over Aroma. I think Great Ball is still pretty solid because you can, still get Archeops with it. But Aroma does give you slightly better odds. But overall, I still think Great Ball might be the way to go. But I don't know. It's like back and forth. There's like a huge debate online between Capturing Aroma and Great Ball. But yeah, Lugia is just still really good right now, in my opinion. It's very strong if it sets up. It's still insanely deadly. It still has 1-hit KO potential. It's got good type coverage right now, which is like the selling point behind Lugia. It's the type coverage that it has in the meta. And again, Lugia just still is Lugia at the end of the day. It still hits really hard, does a lot of damage. And Tyranitar V is insane in the Lost Box because you just Craigalanche them early on, knock out their Comfeys. Mill 2 cards can be very, very deadly for them. And Lugia can still keep up with mostly everything in the format. That's why I think it is still deserving to be at the number 2 spot. I can't quite put it at number 1 because I think the number 1 spot is still has to be what we all know it's going to be, obviously. But Lugia definitely, I think, is up there for sure. A lot of people will think that it is the best deck. I still think it's the number 2 best deck, but it's definitely top 3 deck in the format. Again, there's a reason why I put Lugia in the S tier on my tier list video because I think Lugia is still really, really good. There's not really any other, like, tech cards Lugia really plays right now. I think the only card you can really fit into Lugia would be, like, a switching card. There's a lot of decks playing at the Mawile right now that can boss stall the Serena. So if you have Radiant Serena or Lumineon in play, and you play no switch in your Lugia deck, your opponent wins the game by going boss Mawile. So that's something you do have to watch out for. So I think if I were to play Lugia to EUIC, I would probably try to squeeze in a couple switching cards, maybe like a couple Escape Rope. Doesn't even hurt either to have a Rope if you start with a Stonejourner or a T-Tar and you want to, move it out of the active. I still think like a Rope or 2 would be good in this deck, but it is very tight on space. It is very tight on space, right? Lugia is not as consistent as it used to be, so you have to squeeze all these Pokemon Search in, and you got to play the Urn of Vitalities because you're playing Single Strike Energy, so it's not as consistent as it used to be. But I still think there's room for tech cards, and maybe even starting playing Dunsparce could be good. Even though I think Lugia still has a very good Miraidon matchup, mainly because of the Stonejourner in the deck. But yeah, Lugia is the number 2 spot. All right, let's move on to number 1. And to nobody's surprise, number 1 on this list is Lost Box. Lost Box is definitely the best deck heading into EUIC. It's going to probably be the most popular deck, like the one that has the most amount of plays, and it's also going to be the one, and I think maybe, I don't know if it'll do the best per se, but I think it will be still a very high-performing deck regardless. Now, there's a couple ways, actually there's more than a couple. There's like 3 ways to play Lost Box right now. The main one is the Charizard one. There's the Sky Steel Stone build, but this Forest Seal Turbo build of Lost Box is now basically considered to be the best way to play Lost Box right now. In fact, a lot of the highest performing Lost Box decks in the current meta right now on Played Out Limitless, like if we're looking at the past few tournaments in the past couple days, the highest performing Lost Zone decks have been this Turbo Forest Seal Stone Dragonite build of Lost Box. People have jumped ship from the Charizard build, they've jumped ship from the Sky Seal Stone heavy build, and now they're focusing on a more faster approach using Forest Seal Stone in the deck to help guarantee, could potentially turn 1 Mirage Gates, or at the very least turn 2 Mirage Gates. And this build of Lost Box is definitely the best one to play right now, in my opinion. Sky Seal Stone, Zapdos, Dragonite, Raikou, Drapion, still a really good archetype. Sky Seal Stone Lost Box is still really good in my opinion. That one might have a harder time into the Turbo build of Lost Box, so and I think that's kind of the selling point right now behind playing the Turbo Lost Box deck. But yeah, Lost Box, again, it's the best deck heading into EUIC, and in my opinion, it is the best deck. And that is, in my opinion, the top 5 best decks for EUIC. Again, we got Mew, we got Giratina Lost Zone, we got Lugia, we got Gardy, and we got Lost Box in the top 5. I think if I were to say any honorable mentions, I'm not going to include an honorable mention section in this video, but if I were to include any honorable mentions, I think the honorable mentions for this top 5 list would probably be Arceus Giratina, probably would be number 6, and then number 7, I would probably just give to Miraidon. So that's, in my opinion, the top. Those are like the bubbling under. Like Arctina, I debated put on the list. Arctina is actually a really good deck right now, and a lot of people are really riding on the Arceus Giratina hype train. But I think Mew is still a better deck than Arctina, but Arctina definitely is still a very strong deck. Arctina would definitely be my number 6 spot, and then at number 7, I would probably give it to Miraidon. I don't think Miraidon has enough good performances yet. to actually warranted a spot on the list. But Miraidon is starting to creep up in popularity, and I do think we are going to see a Miraidon deck do really well at EUIC. Again, meta prediction video. We'll save my thoughts for that later this week. But that'll be it for today's video. Let me know what you thought of the top 5. Do you agree with the top 5? Let me know what you think of the list down below. If you're going to EUIC, I was about to say what you're playing, but don't say what you're playing. You don't want to leak what you're playing. But I'm excited to watch EUIC. It's going to be a fun time, and hope you enjoyed the top 5 video, and I will catch you all later. Bye-bye.